Let's talk about Black history and the environmental justice movement. In the 1970s, the Black Panther Party began working on issues of what is now called environmental racism before the term had even been coined. Throughout the 1970s, the Black Panther Party began working on issues of what is now called environmental racism before the term had even been coined. They engaged in programming and other local organizing activities, which highlighted issues like the unequitable distribution of trash in predominantly Black neighborhoods. But it was not until 1982 when this violent practice finally received nationwide attention, following a proposal to dump toxic chemicals with known adverse health effects into a landfill located in Warren County, North Carolina, one of the only majority Black counties located in the entire state. In September of that year, 6,000 truckloads were sent into Warren County, but frustrated citizens met them, blocking the roads by lying down in protest. 6 weeks of sit-ins and other nonviolent protests then followed, and over 500 people were arrested during this time. This is also cited as the first time in American history that people were ever arrested over the siting of a landfill. Well, unfortunately, the citizens of Warren County were eventually unsuccessful and the toxic chemicals were dumped into the landfill originally outlined. Their efforts are widely recognized as the birth of the environmental justice movement. Civil rights leader Reverend Benjamin Chavez then coined the term environmental racism, going on to continue to work in the movement. 5 years later, he led the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice in publishing one of the first reports to demonstrate urgency for environmental justice. Chavez discussed his involvement and the severity of the issue, saying, "The issue of environmental racism is an issue of life and death. It is not just an issue of some form of prejudice where someone doesn't like you because of the color of your skin. This is an issue that will take your life away if you don't get involved." So Black movement leaders teamed up with other people of color, including Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Indigenous movement leaders. Together, they co-wrote a letter criticizing the racist practices of the Group of 10 large-scale, predominantly white environmental organizations. And a year later, in 1991, the first People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was formed, taking place in Washington, D.C. It was here that the 17 principles of environmental justice were formed, which still serve as the base of the movement today. Yet, Black organizers and voices are still largely excluded from the mainstream narrative of organizations working on environmental issues. Data from a January 2021 report shows that out of the 40 largest organizations working in the movement today, on average, organizations added 6 people of color and 8 women to their full-time staff from 2017 to 2020. Furthermore, only 2 people of color and 2 women were on average added to senior staff at each of these organizations, and only 1 person of color and 1 woman was added to their boards. It is critical to center the voices of people of color in the environmental movement. We cannot have environmental justice if we do not acknowledge environmental racism first. Black communities are disproportionately affected by air pollution issues in the United States today. Indigenous populations are disproportionately affected by ocean acidification issues in the United States today. And a 2018 study published by Rice University and the University of Pittsburgh found that while majority white communities tend to see an increase in wealth after a natural disaster, communities of color tend to see a decrease in wealth. This is largely due to white communities receiving larger amounts of reinvestment in their communities following natural disasters than communities of color do. People of color are at the front lines of the climate crisis, period. Their voices should be centered within this movement as we go forward doing environmental justice work. It's time to expand the conversation surrounding climate justice to ensure that the most marginalized voices are heard and centered within the movement.